Well, folks, pull up a chair. I need to talk to you about something that happened this week that tells you everything about what happens when someone governing by chaos, by impulse, by whatever sounds good in the moment without thinking through consequences, finally runs into reality. When policies designed to play to the base collide with the actual complexity of governing. When tactics that work in deep red areas fail spectacularly in places where you actually have to win over persuadable voters. When your signature issue, the thing you've built your entire political identity around for a decade, starts backfiring in places you can't afford to lose. Donald Trump's night just fell apart. A major swing state is revolting. And I'm not talking about Democrats organizing resistance. I'm not talking about progressive activists mounting protests. I'm talking about Republicans, Trump's own party. In North Carolina, one of the most critical battleground states for 2026, Republicans who need to win, there are sounding alarm bells, are publicly warning that Trump's immigration crackdown isn't just controversial, it's politically dangerous, could cost them elections, could destroy advantages they've held for years. This is breaking. This is significant. This tells you that even in Trump's Republican Party, even among people who've gone along with everything else, even in a state Trump won, there are limits. There are points where political reality overcomes partisan loyalty, where self-preservation kicks in, where people start calculating whether staying on the Trump train is worth the cost. And what they're seeing in North Carolina scares them enough to speak publicly, to warn that what Trump's doing isn't working, to admit that his signature issue is backfiring, to signal that revolt might be necessary for political survival. Let me walk you through what's happening, because understanding the details matters. Understanding why this is different from other Trump controversies matters. Understanding what it means when your own party starts publicly questioning your core policy matters. According to a new Politico report, there's growing panic among GOP leaders in North Carolina. Panic. That's the word. Not concern, not worry. Panic among Republicans in a state Trump won about Trump's immigration policies, the thing he's been doing since day one, the issue he built his political career on, the policy his base demands. And why are they panicking? Because they believe Trump's aggressive immigration raids aren't just controversial in the way everything Trump does is controversial. They're politically dangerous. Could backfire in a state where the Senate race is expected to be one of the most expensive and competitive in the country. Could cost Republicans a seat they need. Could destroy electoral chances because Trump won't adjust his approach to political reality. Now, here's what makes this different. Until now, the Trump administration targeted blue states, focused on Democratic cities they claim act as sanctuaries. That's politically safe. That plays to the base. Doesn't cost Trump anything because those states oppose him anyway. Doesn't hurt Republicans electorally because those areas don't vote for them. But expanding the strategy into North Carolina is the first real test of whether these heavy-handed tactics can survive in a purple state, in a place where elections are competitive, where you need to win independents, where you can't just play to your base and win, where political coalitions are fragile, where overreach costs you. And so far, it's not going well. Local Republicans are sounding alarms that raids in the Charlotte area are confusing voters, backfiring with independents, fracturing their own base, creating problems rather than solving them, making it harder to win elections they need to win. The Trump administration insists these sweeps target the worst of the worst criminals. That's the talking point. That's what they say to justify the operations. But GOP officials on the ground say the message is not getting through at all. Not getting through. The justification isn't working. The political benefit isn't materializing. The thing that's supposed to be a winner is becoming a loser. And then you get to Pat McCrory, former Republican governor of North Carolina, not some Democrat, not some never-Trumper, a Republican who governed the state, who understands its politics, who knows what works there. And McCrory is warning, publicly, that the party once held a strong advantage on immigration by focusing on criminals and gangs. But now Trump's chaotic and disjointed operations are destroying that advantage. Let me repeat that. Trump's operations are destroying the Republican advantage on immigration in North Carolina. according to a former Republican governor. That's not spin. That's not partisan attack. That's political assessment from someone whose job is to understand what works electorally in that state. And McCrory didn't mince words, said immigration is now having a negative impact on the Republican Party for the first time. First time. The issue that was supposed to be a winner, that Trump built his career on, that Republicans have used to mobilize voters for years, is now hurting them in a swing state because Trump's approach is too chaotic, too disjointed, too poorly explained. McCrory adds that the administration isn't even clearly explaining who they're arresting or how these raids help the community, can't communicate what they're doing or why, can't make the political case, can't translate the policy into something that wins over persuadable voters. Just chaos and confusion and operations that look scary rather than reassuring. That's devastating. That's Trump's centerpiece issue, the one he's built his identity around for a decade, the thing that's supposed to be his strength, starting to collapse in a swing state he cannot afford to lose. Not because Democrats are successfully attacking it, but because Republicans in that state are saying it doesn't work, isn't communicated well, is costing them politically. Now, let me put this in context, because this isn't happening in isolation. This is part of a broader pattern. Trump's had an absolutely horrible week. Multiple fronts where things are falling apart, where policies aren't working, where political costs are mounting, where even allies are starting to question whether this approach is sustainable. Start with Ukraine. Trump's peace proposal, the one he announced without consulting Congress, without consulting Europeans, without reading in Zelensky and the Ukrainians, the one that heavily favors Russia. That proposal is getting ferocious pushback, and Trump keeps changing deadlines. Started with Thanksgiving for some reason. Now it's back and forth about whether it's even an American plan. The chaos, as one analyst noted, unfortunately represents so much of Trump foreign policy. No consistency, no follow-through, no coherent strategy, just announcements and reversals and confusion. Zelensky's been through this before with Trump. The back and forth, the support you then pull it back dynamic, the proposals that seem designed more for Trump's political benefit than for actually solving problems. And now, Zelensky's being asked to accept a proposal that heavily favors Russia. That rewards aggression. That undermines Ukrainian dignity. And analysts are warning this sends horrible signals, not just for Europe, but for China. President Xi is watching, seeing whether Americans are willing to throw in the towel on Ukraine. And if they are, he's thinking it gives him clearer path toward taking Taiwan. That's the strategic cost. That's what happens when you make deals that reward aggression. You encourage more aggression from other adversaries who learn that challenging American interests works because America won't sustain support for allies. That's not strength. That's weakness. That's undermining deterrence. That's making future conflicts more likely because you've demonstrated you won't stay committed when allies need you. And allies everywhere are watching, wondering whether American commitments mean anything, whether they can count on support, whether they should make alternative arrangements. That's the cost of Trump's chaotic approach. That's what happens when foreign policy is driven by impulse rather than strategy, when deals are designed for headlines rather than for sustainable solutions, when you don't consult allies or Congress or anyone who might inject reality into your plans. Then there's the economy, tariffs, Trump's other signature issue, the thing he's convinced will bring back manufacturing, will rescue American workers, will make America great again economically, and it's failing, spectacularly. Look at the data. The goods-producing part of the economy, factories, construction, other goods-producing sectors. That part of the economy is in recession. And the turning point just happens to be Liberation Day, the day Trump implemented his tariffs, the day he claimed would rescue American manufacturing. Instead, manufacturing is declining. Jobs are being lost. The very sector Trump promised to help is being hurt because tariffs on steel and aluminum make it harder for American factories to do business, make their inputs more expensive, make them less competitive, hurt them rather than help them. That's incoherent policy having unexpected effects. That's what happens when you implement policies based on slogans rather than on understanding how economies actually work. When you think tariffs help manufacturing without considering that manufacturers use imported materials. When you don't think through consequences beyond the immediate political benefit, and Americans are paying the price. Higher cost of living, inflation driven by tariffs, paying more for goods, struggling to make ends meet, all while being told this sacrifice is necessary to rescue manufacturing. Except manufacturing isn't being rescued, it's being hurt. So the sacrifice isn't even achieving its stated goal. It's just making everyone worse off for no benefit. That's the Trump economy in 2025. Chaos. Poorly thought through policies. Consequences nobody planned for. Political promises colliding with economic reality. And ordinary Americans bearing the cost while Trump blames everyone else and claims everything's fine. So that's the context. Failed Ukraine policy. Failed economic policy. And now, potentially, failing immigration policy in a swing state, where Trump's own party is revolting, where Republicans are publicly warning that his approach is politically dangerous, where even allies are saying this isn't working. Let me talk about what this means politically. Because North Carolina matters, really matters. It's one of the most critical battlegrounds for 2026. Senate race is expected to be expensive and competitive. Republicans need to hold seats, need to maintain their majority, can't afford to lose races because Trump's policies are backfiring, and North Carolina isn't safely Republican anymore. It's purple. Trump won it in 2024, but not by overwhelming margins. It's competitive. It swings. It has large numbers of independent voters who decide elections. It has suburban areas that have been trending Democratic. It has constituencies that are persuadable but won't respond to heavy-handed approaches. That's why McCrory's warnings matter. He understands North Carolina politics, knows what works there, knows that immigration can be a winning issue if you focus on criminals and gangs and public safety, but knows it becomes a losing issue if operations look chaotic and disjointed and scary. If you can't explain who you're arresting and why, if communities feel terrorized rather than protected, and that's what's happening. The raids in Charlotte are confusing voters, making people uncomfortable, looking less like law enforcement and more like something else, something that reminds people of things they don't like, something that feels un-American, something that pushes persuadable voters away rather than winning them over. Independents are particularly important. They decide close elections. They're not committed to either party. They respond to competence and effectiveness and policies that seem reasonable. When they see chaos, when they see heavy-handed tactics, when they can't get clear explanations of what's happening and why, they move away. They decide the party responsible isn't fit to govern. They vote for the other side. That's what Republicans in North Carolina are seeing. That's why they're panicking, because they can read polls, can talk to voters, can see that Trump's approach is moving independents away, is fracturing even some parts of the base, is creating political problems that might cost them elections. And it's not just North Carolina. The Politico report raises the bigger question. How many more battleground states are quietly reaching their breaking point? How many other places where Republicans need to win are seeing similar problems? How many other states have GOP officials who are worried but haven't spoken publicly yet? How widespread is the concern that Trump's approach is politically unsustainable? We don't know. But if North Carolina Republicans are speaking out, are publicly warning about political danger, that suggests the problem is real, is significant, is causing enough concern that people are willing to risk Trump's wrath by questioning his signature policy. Let me talk about what this means for Trump's political future. Because immigration has been his core issue since 2015, since he came down the escalator and called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, since he promised the wall, since he made immigration the centerpiece of his political identity, and it's worked for him politically, has mobilized his base, has given him an issue that distinguishes him from establishment Republicans, has allowed him to claim he's fighting for Americans against elites who don't care about border security, has been central to his political success. But that success has always been in contexts where he could afford to be extreme, where he was mobilizing base voters in primaries, where he was winning low turnout elections, where he could lose persuadable voters as long as he maximized turnout among supporters, where political coalitions could be narrow because you didn't need to win big majorities. Governing is different. Requires building broader coalitions. Requires winning independents. Requires not alienating constituencies you might need. Requires explaining policies in ways that make people comfortable. Requires competence and effectiveness and results that people can see. And Trump's approach to immigration doesn't translate well to governing. The chaos, the lack of clear communication, the heavy-handed tactics, the inability to explain who's being targeted and why, the operations that look scary rather than reassuring. All of that works for mobilizing the base but fails at building broader support. And in purple states like North Carolina, you need broader support. Need to win independents. Need some persuadable voters who might not love everything you do but think you're competent enough to govern. Need political coalitions that include more than just the hardcore base. When your signature issue starts failing in those contexts, when your own party in swing states starts warning it's backfiring, that's a fundamental political problem. That's not something you can fix with better messaging. That's a problem with the underlying approach, with governing through chaos, with policies designed for political theater rather than for effectiveness. And Trump can't easily change, can't moderate his approach without alienating the base, can't explain policies better when the problem is the policies themselves create chaos, can't build broader coalitions when his entire political identity is built on being extreme and uncompromising. He's trapped by his own brand, by the expectations he's created, by the base he's cultivated. That trap is what Republicans in North Carolina are seeing. They need to win there, need Trump to not cost them races. But Trump can't or won't adjust, can't govern differently, can't moderate even when political necessity requires it. So they're stuck, tied to an approach they know is failing but unable to do anything about it. That's politically unsustainable. That's how parties lose. That's how political coalitions fracture. That's how elections that should be competitive become disasters, when you're stuck with an approach that's failing but can't change course. Now, let me talk about the economics of immigration policy, because there are real economic issues here that Trump's approach ignores, that his chaos obscures, that his inability to communicate clearly prevents people from understanding. Immigration is economically complex. Immigrants contribute to the economy, start businesses at higher rates than native-born Americans, fill jobs in sectors where labor is scarce, pay taxes, contribute to Social Security, help keep industries viable that might otherwise struggle to find workers. The economic research is pretty clear that immigration, on balance, benefits the economy. But there are also costs. Some workers in some sectors face wage competition. Some communities experience rapid demographic change that creates social tensions. Some people use public services. There are real trade-offs, real complexities, real reasons why immigration policy is difficult. Smart immigration policy recognizes those complexities, tries to maximize benefits while minimizing costs, focuses enforcement on people who actually pose threats, creates legal pathways for people the economy needs, invests in communities experiencing rapid change, communicates clearly about what's happening and why, builds support by showing competence and effectiveness. Trump's approach does none of that. It's chaos. Heavy-handed raids that don't distinguish between people who pose threats and people who don't. No clear communication about who's being targeted. No investment in affected communities. No legal pathways for people the economy needs. Just enforcement for enforcement's sake. Theater designed to look tough without thinking through economic or political consequences. That's not policy. That's performance. And it's failing in North Carolina, where Republicans are warning it's backfiring, where even Trump's own party is saying the approach isn't working, where political costs are mounting high enough that people are speaking out despite risk. I've been investing for 80 years. I've watched politicians try to govern through slogans, try to implement policies based on what sounds good rather than what works, try to ignore complexity because it's politically inconvenient. And I've watched it fail every time, because reality eventually catches up. Because you can't sustain policies that don't work. Because political coalitions built on performance rather than effectiveness eventually collapse. That's what's happening with Trump's immigration policy. In North Carolina, where reality is catching up, where the performance isn't working anymore, where political coalitions are showing strain, where even Republicans are saying this approach is unsustainable. And economically, that matters, because immigration policy affects labor markets, affects industries, affects communities, affects whether businesses can find workers, affects whether sectors can remain competitive, affects economic growth and productivity and innovation. When immigration policy is driven by chaos rather than by understanding of economic realities, you get bad outcomes. You hurt industries that need workers. You create uncertainty that makes businesses reluctant to invest. You damage communities rather than helping them. You impose costs without achieving benefits. That's what Trump's approach does. Imposes costs, economic and political, without achieving stated goals. Makes everything worse while claiming to make it better. Creates chaos while promising order. Hurts the economy while claiming to help it. And Republicans in North Carolina are seeing that, are seeing the costs, are seeing that the political benefits don't materialize, are seeing that chaos doesn't win over independence, are seeing that they're stuck with an approach that's failing but that they can't easily abandon because it's central to Trump's identity. That's the bind. That's the political trap. That's why they're panicking, because they need to win. Need Trump to not cost them races. But Trump can't change, can't govern differently, can't adjust even when adjustment is politically necessary. So they're trapped with an approach they know is failing. Now, some people might ask, if Trump's approach is failing, why doesn't he change? Why doesn't he moderate? Why doesn't he adjust to political reality? And the answer is simple. He can't. Not won't, though there's that too, but fundamentally can't. Trump's entire political identity is built on being extreme, on never backing down, on doubling down when criticized, on treating any adjustment as weakness. His base expects that, demands it, would abandon him if he moderated. He's created expectations he can't escape, built a brand he can't change, cultivated a following that would see adjustment as betrayal. So he's trapped. Even when political necessity requires moderation, even when his own party is warning his approach is failing, even when swing states are revolting, he can't change. Because changing would destroy the thing that makes him Trump, would alienate the base that's his only reliable support, would admit weakness in a political culture where he's built everything on projecting strength. That trap is what makes this moment significant. This isn't Trump having a bad week that he'll recover from. This is fundamental political problem. His signature issue is backfiring in a swing state. His own party is revolting. His economic policies are failing. His foreign policy is chaotic. And he can't adjust because adjustment is impossible given who he is and what he's built. That's politically unsustainable. That's how political careers end. That's how parties lose power. When the person at the center can't adapt to reality, when political necessity requires change, but change is impossible. When you're trapped by your own brand and your own base and your own inability to govern competently. Now, I don't know how this ends. Don't know whether Republicans in North Carolina will actually revolt or just complain quietly while going along. Don't know whether other swing states will follow or stay silent. Don't know whether Trump will face real political consequences or whether partisan loyalty will keep his party in line despite everything. But I know the dynamics are unsustainable. Know that you can't govern effectively through chaos. Know that political coalitions built on performance rather than effectiveness eventually collapse. Know that reality catches up with politicians who ignore it. Know that economic policies that don't work eventually impose costs that become politically intolerable. Trump's having a horrible week because those dynamics are catching up, because reality is intruding, because political costs are mounting, because even allies are starting to calculate whether staying loyal is worth it, because swing states are revolting, because his own party is panicking, because his signature issues are failing. That's not one bad news cycle. That's pattern. That's structural political problem. That's what happens when you govern through chaos and performance rather than through competence and effectiveness. And it suggests Trump's political future is more fragile than it looked. I've seen this pattern before. Politicians who build everything on performance, who can't adjust to reality, who get trapped by their own brands and bases, who keep doubling down even when losing. And I've seen how it ends. Not well, not quickly, but inevitably. Trump might survive this particular moment, might weather the revolt in North Carolina, might find ways to keep his party in line despite everything, might avoid immediate political consequences. But the dynamics are unsustainable. The approach is failing. The political costs are mounting. The economic reality is catching up, and he can't change, can't adjust, can't moderate, can't govern differently. That's politically fatal. Eventually, maybe not today, maybe not this month, but eventually, because you can't sustain failure indefinitely, can't keep governing through chaos without costs, can't keep alienating swing voters and expect to win elections, can't keep implementing policies that hurt the economy and expect people not to notice. Reality catches up, always does. And when it does to Trump, when the political costs become too high, even for loyal Republicans to ignore, when swing states revolt in numbers too large to dismiss, when economic failures become too obvious to deny, that's when political careers end. We might be seeing the beginning of that, might be watching the first cracks appear, might be witnessing the moment when Trump's approach starts failing in ways that can't be ignored or spun or blamed on others. Or maybe not. Maybe this blows over. Maybe North Carolina Republicans fall in line. Maybe other states stay quiet. Maybe Trump survives another crisis through force of will and partisan loyalty. But the dynamics remain. The chaos continues. The policies keep failing. The political costs keep mounting. And eventually, probably, reality wins. Reality always does. Just takes time. Sometimes longer than you'd expect. But eventually. That's what I'm watching. Not whether Trump survives this particular week, but whether the dynamics that are creating problems become unsustainable. Whether political reality finally catches up to political performance. Whether swing states revolting becomes a trend rather than an outlier. Because if it does, if North Carolina's revolt spreads, if other swing states follow, if Trump's own party starts calculating that loyalty costs more than it's worth, then we're watching something significant. Not just a bad week, but the beginning of the end of Trump's ability to govern through chaos without consequences. That's the story. That's what matters. That's what this moment might represent. Not certainty, but possibility. That reality is catching up. That political costs are mounting. That even Trump's coalition has limits. That governing through chaos is unsustainable. And if that's true, if this is the beginning of something rather than just another crisis Trump survives, then we're witnessing something important. The moment when political reality reasserts itself, when performance stops being enough, when voters demand competence, when allies demand effectiveness, when even your own party says the approach is failing and needs to change. That's hope. Not certainty, but hope that democracy can correct itself. That bad governance eventually faces consequences. That political coalitions built on chaos eventually fracture. That America can recover from mistakes and choose better. That's what I'm hoping for. What North Carolina Republicans revolting might represent. What this horrible week for Trump might signal. Not the end necessarily, but the beginning of the end. The first signs that reality is catching up. That political costs are becoming intolerable. That change is necessary even if Trump can't deliver it. And if enough people see that, if enough voters recognize that chaos isn't strength, if enough Republicans calculate that loyalty isn't worth the cost, if enough swing states revolt, then maybe, possibly, hopefully, we turn a corner. That's what this moment might be. That's why it matters. That's why Republican revolt in North Carolina is significant. Not because it changes everything immediately, but because it might be the beginning of something that does. Eventually, when reality finally wins, as it always does, given enough time,